It was just after 12:15 in the afternoon when the cafeteria at Anderson Air Base came alive with noise. Metal trays clattered against the counter, boots thudded across the tile floor, and the smell of reheated coffee mixed with peppered chicken drifted through the air. Airmen crowded around tables, uniforms loosened, jokes bouncing from one end of the room to the other. The kind of routine chaos that filled every lunch hour on base. Then the door opened, and the noise shifted. Maya Hale stepped inside carrying her tray. She was young, maybe 26, wearing civilian khakis and a dark blue maintenance shirt with her name stitched above the pocket. A faint, lightning-shaped scar traced down the side of her jaw, catching the fluorescent light as she passed. Conversations dimmed for just a second, long enough for curiosity to flicker through the room. Then the whispers began again, sharper this time. Someone muttered that she was the technician who had messed up the navigation calibration on an F-15 2 weeks ago. Another voice laughed, saying she was lucky to still have a badge. Maya didn't react. She moved with quiet precision, setting her tray on an empty table in the corner. Her posture was straight, shoulders squared, movements economical. She aligned her fork parallel to her plate without thinking about it, the kind of habit drilled into people who have lived under inspection for years. Her limp was barely noticeable, just a subtle hesitation in her step as she sat down. Around her, the sound of laughter rose again, rough and careless, the kind that fills space when people are uncomfortable and want to cover it. From the far side of the room, two young airmen nudged each other, glancing at her like she was some kind of curiosity. They didn't understand why her silence bothered them. It wasn't defiance. Not exactly. It was something steadier, something trained. The way she kept her gaze level, the way her hands rested perfectly still on the edge of the table. Every gesture spoke of discipline that didn't fit the title printed on her ID badge. Civilian avionics technician. Outside the window, the American flag moved in the warm Pacific wind, colors bright against the blue sky. Maya watched it for a moment, her face unreadable. Around her, the noise of the cafeteria swallowed itself again, but she didn't seem to hear it. The narrator's voice would come softly here, reminding us that people often mistake quiet for weakness, that they only see what fits their stories. They thought they knew who she was. They were wrong. The morning broke clear over Anderson Air Base, the kind of still light that painted the flight line in gold before the heat took hold. It was 6:30 when the turbines began to roll up across the tarmac, a steady hum that made the walls of Hangar 12 tremble. Inside, Maya Hale worked beneath the open belly of an F-15E Strike Eagle, her tools laid out in perfect order on a clean mat. She checked the EGI navigation unit, tracing cables with the quiet patience of someone who knew every inch of the aircraft by feel. Her gloves were already marked with graphite and oil, her posture steady, her breathing even. Around her, two young airmen worked slower than they spoke. One leaned close to the other, whispering that she was the contractor who botched a calibration last month. The other laughed softly, saying she must be some kind of diversity quota, not a real technician. Their voices carried just far enough to sting, but not enough to risk a reprimand. Maya didn't respond. She simply looked up from the EGI panel, eyes calm, unreadable. And in that moment, the laughter stopped. Her stillness unsettled them more than any anger would have. She returned to her work without a word. Captain Ryan Monroe entered a few minutes later, his flight suit still creased from morning inspection. He liked to be heard before he was seen, his voice bouncing off the metal walls of the hangar. He called out her name and told her to be careful not to break anything this time. His tone was playful on the surface but edged with the satisfaction of command. Maya answered, "Yes, sir," with the kind of tone that stripped the comment of power. She didn't look at him again. Monroe waited for irritation. Something to push back against, but there was nothing. That quiet professionalism made him turn away, muttering under his breath as he barked orders to his crew. Upstairs, behind the glass of the control office, Wing Commander Aaron Doyle watched the exchange. He had served long enough to recognize discipline when he saw it. He noticed her limp, the precision in her movements, the economy of her work. She handled every tool like it had purpose and weight. Doyle spoke softly to his adjutant that the woman worked like someone trained, someone who'd learned her trade where mistakes meant blood, not paperwork. The hangar stayed busy as the morning wore on, filled with the hiss of hydraulics and the clang of tools against metal. When the others broke for coffee at 9:15, Maya stayed behind, tightening bolts, double-checking torque values, and signing her AFTO 781A log with a clean hand. Above her, the flag outside the hangar reflected faintly across the polished fuselage, unseen by anyone but her. The narrator's voice would say that people see what they expect to see, that the quiet ones often carry the stories no one bothers to ask about. It was almost 9:40 when the hangar finally emptied. The sound of footsteps faded down the corridor until only the steady hum of the lights remained. Maya Hale stood on the platform beside the open fuselage of an F-15E, her tools laid out in perfect alignment. The night breeze carried the faint smell of jet fuel from the flight line. She worked quietly, tightening a panel bolt that no one would have noticed was loose. Her reflection glimmered faintly on the aircraft's silver skin, a reminder of how still she could be when the world around her moved too fast. The metallic click of her wrench echoed once, then faded. For a moment, she stopped moving. Her mind slipped somewhere else, past the hangar, past the Pacific, back to a mountain range half a world away. Afghanistan, 2015, Gardez Pass. A rescue mission gone wrong. She could still feel the vibration of rotor blades in her chest, the weight of the headset pressing into her ears, the smell of hydraulic fluid burning in smoke. The HH-60G Pavehawk had gone down after taking ground fire, the night sky split by tracer rounds. She remembered the heat, the static in her comms, the panic in voices that cracked over the radio. She had crawled through fire to reach the wreck. The first pilot was alive but barely breathing, pinned by twisted metal. The second crewman's flight suit was burning. She pulled them both free before the main fuel tank ignited. The explosion lifted her off the ground, throwing shards of debris that tore through her flight jacket. One man survived. One didn't. The scar across her jaw came from a piece of glass, a mark that stayed after the bandages came off. The doctors later told her she might not walk right again, that she had done her part and could go home. When she returned stateside, she left active duty quietly. She signed a contract as a civilian avionics technician, a way to stay near the sound of engines without the weight of a call sign. Anderson. Air Base became familiar. But she never spoke of that night. Her silence, her limp, and that thin silver scar were all that told the story. The memory drifted away as quickly as it had come. She adjusted a loose connector on the F-15's avionics bay, the metal cool under her fingertips. The narrator would say that sometimes silence holds more truth than words ever could. And for Maya Hale, that truth was enough. The crew room smelled of coffee that had been sitting too long, and oil that never really left the air. It was just after 10:30 when the talk started. Light at first, then sharper. A few young airmen leaned back in their chairs, laughing about how Maya Hale still walked like she was on parade. Someone said she probably faked her credentials, that no civilian moved like that unless they were trying too hard to impress. Their words echoed off the metal walls, bouncing between tool lockers and whiteboards covered in checklists. The noise filled the room the way arrogance always does when no one stands against it. Captain Ryan Monroe walked in mid-sentence, mug in hand, and caught the tail end of the conversation. Instead of stopping it, he smirked. He added his own jab, saying some people thought too highly of themselves just because they could hold a wrench. Laughter rolled across the room. Maya was within earshot, sitting at the far table, logging flight data with her usual calm. She didn't even glance up. Her pen moved in. Clean. Even strokes across the form. Every time a joke landed, she simply turned the page, checked another box, or adjusted the corner of a napkin on her tray. Her silence only made the laughter louder. Across the hangar, Airman First Class Ben Lewis watched the scene from his workbench. He had started to notice things others didn't. The way Maya grounded herself before touching a circuit, or how she paused to double-check voltage even when she knew the reading would be perfect. He realized her quiet wasn't ignorance. It was training. When the teasing spilled into the hangar later that day, he spoke up, saying maybe she knew something they didn't. The words hit the floor and disappeared under another wave of laughter. Still, the seed was planted. By mid-afternoon, Monroe called across the hangar again, making another sarcastic remark. Maya replied simply, "Yes, sir," and returned to her checklist. The air felt different. After that, even the younger airmen stopped laughing, unsure why the exchange left them uneasy. The turbines outside began to spool up for evening flight prep, their sound rising into a steady roar. Maya packed her tools in order, lined up each wrench by size, and paused for a moment at the open bay doors. The American flag snapped in the wind, catching the light as she watched it. The narrator would close the moment quietly, saying her silence was not weakness, but strength, and that some people never learn the difference between discipline and distance. The next morning, the hangar buzzed with the sharp rhythm of pre-flight checks. It was 9:45 when one of the F-15E Strike Eagles failed its EGI alignment for the third time. The red fault light blinked on the control screen like a warning nobody wanted to claim. Captain Ryan Monroe, standing with a clipboard in hand, saw his moment. His voice carried across the hangar as he called out for Maya Hale, loud enough for every technician and pilot within earshot to turn. He told her to recalibrate the system, this time under a 15-minute timer. The airmen nearby exchanged looks. A few smirked. Some stayed quiet, unsure whether to feel sorry for her or curious enough to watch. Maya didn't argue. She walked over, rolling the diagnostic cart behind her. She verified the grounding cable, checked the power connection, and began her setup. Her movements were slow, deliberate, without waste, the kind of rhythm that came from years of muscle memory. When Monroe's timer started, the tension in the air changed. He stood with folded arms, waiting for her to stumble. The whine of the hangar's ventilation fans filled the silence as Maya typed her commands, gloved hands steady on the keyboard. The faint hum of electronics replaced the chatter that had filled the room only moments before. She purged the old EGI data, wiped residual codes, and initiated a cold start alignment. Her eyes tracked the progress bars crawling across the screen, every flicker reflecting on her safety glasses. At the 6-minute mark, she accessed a hidden diagnostic page, one known only to seasoned avionics personnel, and adjusted the inertial drift manually. The data stabilized. The red fault light flickered once, and then turned green. A soft click echoed as she locked the panel in place. The timer read just over 10 minutes. The hangar went quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavier than noise. Monroe forced a half smile, trying to joke that civilians could follow orders after all. Nobody laughed. Airman Ben Lewis, standing in the back, realized that what he had just seen wasn't luck. It was precision, confidence, and something deeper. Someone who had worked through pressure much worse than this. Maya didn't respond. She filled out her AFTO 781A maintenance log, writing neatly before signing her name. Then she turned, gathered her tools, and walked back to her station. Behind her, the tension stayed in the air, mixed with something else that no one dared to say aloud. Respect. It was 1:30 in the afternoon when Hangar 12 filled with the sound of motion. The emergency drill had been planned for weeks, designed to test crew coordination under simulated aircraft failure. Captain Ryan Monroe stood at the center of the bay, clipboard in hand, while Wing Commander Aaron Doyle observed from the office window above. Every checklist, every call over the radio was part of the exercise. Maya Hale had been reluctantly added to the roster, assigned to monitor power systems on one of the F-15E Strike Eagles. She worked quietly at the diagnostic station, verifying the electrical bus status as Monroe barked orders across the floor. The air was hot, heavy with the mix of jet fuel and the metallic scent of machinery. At first, everything followed script. Hydraulic pressure readings came over comms. Checklist confirmations echoed from the crew chiefs, and the exercise timer rolled forward. Then, a sharp pop cut through the noise, followed by a hiss that turned into a shriek. A jet near the center of the hangar vented fluid in a fine mist that flashed into flame before anyone understood what had happened. The blue-white fire crawled along the underside of the fuselage. For one frozen second, no one moved. Monroe's head snapped toward the blaze, his mouth open, trying to decide if this was still part of the drill. Maya didn't wait. She dropped her clipboard, sprinting toward the jet as the fire alarms began to scream. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and steady, commanding the power to be killed. 2 airmen hesitated at the circuit panel until she shouted again. The hangar lights flickered as the master power went offline. She slid under the aircraft, heat searing through her coveralls, and traced the rupture by instinct. The hydraulic line had burst near the actuator manifold. She reached for the isolation valve, twisting it until the pressure hissed out like a dying breath. Outside, the fire crew was moving in, but she waved them off with a sharp hand signal. 2 fingers, then a fist. Wait for her mark. A young airman, Private Newman, stumbled backward as a tool cart toppled, pinning his leg beneath a heavy cable reel. Maya saw him fall through the smoke. Without thinking, she crawled toward him, dragging herself through the haze until she reached him. She braced, lifted the reel with both arms, and pulled him out by his vest straps. Her left leg shook from strain and old pain, but she didn't stop. She vented the line manually using a CO2 hose, cooling the connection point before the fluid could reignite. By the time the fire crew advanced, the flames were nearly gone. Only steam and the smell of scorched rubber remained. The alarms quieted one by one, leaving a silence that felt unnatural. Maya's gloves were torn, her right palm streaked with blood, but her breathing was steady. Monroe stood frozen, soot streaking his face, staring at her like he was seeing her for the first time. When he finally spoke, his voice was thin. "How did you know what to do?" She looked up, calm as always, and said softly that she'd done it before. Moments later, Wing Commander Doyle stepped into the hangar with his inspection team. His boots echoed on the deck as he took in the damage, the scorch marks, the grounded jet. The crew still standing in disbelief. Monroe gave his report, stumbling slightly, saying the civilian technician had led the emergency response. Doyle's eyes settled on Maya. He saw the way she stood, weight balanced, shoulders straight, the quiet readiness of someone who had been trained for worse. He noticed the burn on her hand, the precision in her tone, and something old in the way she carried herself. He didn't ask questions yet. He simply nodded once, his voice even as he ordered the cleanup crew to stand down. The air returned to normal, but no one moved. The hangar smelled of heat and smoke and something else that couldn't be named. Respect. For the first time, everyone saw her not as a civilian, not as a mistake, but as someone forged by experience, someone who ran toward fire when others froze. The debriefing room was colder than it needed to be. The hum of fluorescent lights filled the silence like static, mixing with the low creak of chairs as airmen shifted in their seats. Captain Ryan Monroe stood at the front, marker in hand, his uniform still stained with soot from the afternoon's chaos. On the whiteboard behind him, he wrote the timeline: 1300 hours, simulation start, 1309, hydraulic rupture, 1310, power kill command issued. His voice stayed level, but every word sounded like penance. Maya Hale sat 2 rows back, her right hand bandaged, her eyes fixed on the table in front of her. Around her, pilots and technicians avoided her gaze, each wrestling with a quiet mix of guilt and awe. Monroe read through his notes, his tone mechanical. He described the rupture, the ignition, and how the emergency escalated beyond simulation parameters. His words faltered when he reached the part about the response. He paused, then said that the first real command came from the civilian technician. The air shifted. Before anyone could speak, the door opened. Wing Commander Aaron Doyle entered with the steady authority of someone who had seen too many fires and too many reports that came too late. Everyone stood, reflexes kicking in, but he waved them back into their seats. Doyle crossed the room, his gaze sweeping the faces until it found Maya. He listened quietly as Monroe summarized the sequence of events. When he finished, Doyle asked who issued the first operational order. Monroe hesitated, then admitted it had been her. The commander turned toward Maya, his eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the faint lightning-shaped scar along her jaw. When he spoke again, his voice carried a note of recognition. "Sergeant Hale." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into deep water. No one moved. Monroe blinked, confusion breaking through his composure. He started to explain that she was a contractor, but Doyle stopped him with a glance. He said he remembered that scar. Kandahar, 2015. A Pavehawk crash. Night rescue. A young staff sergeant who pulled 2 airmen from a burning helicopter and vanished during medevac. The silence thickened. Maya stood slowly, reluctant, as if standing might start a storm she didn't want. She confirmed it, voice even, that she had served 8 years with the United States Air Force, attached to the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers. Her medical discharge followed the crash. The realization rippled through the room like a shockwave. Chairs creaked as people straightened without meaning to. Doyle's voice softened, shifting from command to tribute. He said, "Rank isn't always worn on a uniform. Sometimes it's carried in scars." Then he looked at the room and gave a single quiet order. Present arms, 30 people moved as one, officers and airmen alike, raising their hands to their brows in perfect synchronization. The sound of boots against tile echoed once and fell still. Maya didn't return the salute. She simply stood at ease, eyes clear, the weight of her past visible only in her stillness. Doyle held the salute a moment longer than regulation before lowering his hand. "Order arms." He turned to Monroe, his tone clipped but calm. "Rewrite the debrief," he said. "This time, include what you learned, not just what you lost." Monroe nodded, the words catching in his throat. Around him, men who had mocked her now sat silent, their arrogance burned away by truth. Doyle faced them again, his voice carrying the authority of a man who spoke less often than he commanded. "When you see someone quiet, ask yourself if it's silence or steel." The room stayed still long after he left. The whiteboard's marker lines blurred in the reflection of the fluorescent light. Maya lowered herself back into her chair, expression unreadable. For the first time since her arrival, no one looked at her with doubt, only respect. The scar along her jaw caught the light, not as a mark of failure, but as proof of what strength really looks like when it no longer needs to explain itself. The next afternoon, the hangar stood in stillness. The light from the open bay doors poured across the polished concrete, touching the wings of the F-15E Strike Eagles like a quiet blessing. Every airman, technician, and officer was in formation, Their boots lined perfectly on the deck, eyes forward, uniforms pressed sharp. The turbines outside wound down until only the hum of the wind filled the space. At the center of it all stood Maya Hale, her flightline jacket still smudged with soot from the fire that had nearly gutted the hangar the day before. She didn't know why she'd been called there. She simply followed the order. Wing Commander Aaron Doyle stepped out from the front row, his ribbons glinting in the overhead light. He carried the calm weight of command, but there was warmth in his eyes that didn't belong to a formality. He stopped a few paces from her and gave one clear order. Present arms. The synchronized sound of 30 salutes cracked through the air like a single heartbeat. It was crisp, clean, absolute. The silence that followed was heavier than any noise could have been. Maya looked around, unsure at first. Her instinct told her it was a mistake. But when she turned back, Doyle was still holding his salute, longer than regulation, his gaze steady and unflinching. This was not protocol. It was recognition. The same man who had once commanded rescue teams in war zones now stood in tribute to the quietest person on his base. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Maya nodded once, slow and deliberate. Her eyes brightened, not with tears, but with understanding. The light caught her scar, tracing it like silver. What once drew whispers now gleamed like a badge of service. When the command came, "Order arms," the crew lowered their salutes in perfect rhythm. The echo of boots striking concrete rolled through the hangar. Captain Ryan Monroe stood among them, the weight of guilt heavy in his chest. He stepped forward as the formation broke apart, cap in hand, and stopped in front of her. He apologized quietly, voice low enough that only she could hear. He said he had been wrong. Maya met his eyes without bitterness and told him that everyone learns in their own time. Her words were soft, but they landed harder than any reprimand ever could. Around them, airmen lowered their heads, not in shame but in respect. Airman First Class, Ben Lewis watched from the back, standing a little straighter, his chest rising with something close to pride. Doyle faced the group once more and reminded them that some people wear their rank, while others carry it. The formation broke, and the crew began to drift back to work. As he walked out, the sunlight shifted, glinting off Maya's scar one last time before the bay doors closed. The hangar felt changed, not louder or prouder, just quieter, wiser, and ready to listen. The sun dipped low over Anderson Air Base, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold. The hangars stood quiet now, the earlier ceremony already a memory fading into the hum of the evening. Maya Hale sat by the runway fence with a coffee cup resting between her hands. The heat, long gone, but comforting, all the same. Across the field, an F-15E Strike Eagle taxied toward the line, its navigation lights flickering like tiny stars. The engines roared to life, deep and familiar, a sound that rattled the ground before lifting smoothly into the sky. The wind off the Pacific carried the echo for miles. To Maya, that sound had never meant war. It meant someone was safe. It meant the system worked. She watched the jet climb until it became a faint speck against the darkening horizon. The chain-link fence cast long shadows across her boots. The smell of jet fuel mixed with sea salt, a combination she had come to think of as home. Footsteps approached from behind, careful and respectful. Airman First Class. Ben Lewis stopped a few feet away, holding something in his hand. He asked if he could sit. She nodded, and he lowered himself beside her. The air between them quiet, but not uncomfortable. He held out a clean Air Force patch, saying he thought she should have it for her locker. Maya looked at it for a moment before shaking her head. She told him to keep it. He had earned it by listening. Her voice was calm, the kind that didn't need to teach to be understood. Lewis smiled, and slipped the patch into his pocket. They sat in silence as another jet prepared for takeoff, the runway lights blinking in rhythm. When it lifted off, Maya spoke softly, almost to herself, saying it was still beautiful. Louis asked what she meant. She said, "The sound of a jet taking off means someone else is going home safe tonight." Her words hung in the air, carried away by the wind. The narrator's voice would tell us that bases like this one are filled with people whose stories rarely reach the world beyond the gate. Mechanics, pilots, medics, and veterans who carry purpose quietly, who fix and rebuild so others can move forward. When Louis left, Maya stayed seated a little longer before rising to her feet. She straightened her posture, an old reflex that never faded, and turned toward the flagpole near the hangar. The flag caught the last light of day, its fabric glowing faintly in the dusk. She raised her hand in a slow, perfect salute. There were no witnesses, no applause, only the distant hum of another jet climbing toward the horizon. The closing words lingered like the evening air, saying that some heroes do not fight for recognition. They fix, they rebuild, and they keep others flying. Her scar, once seen as a flaw, now shown as proof of what survives. Not every hero wears a uniform. Some show up quietly, day after day, without expectation or recognition. They keep things running, they fix what's broken, and they hold the line when others falter. Maya Hale's story reminds us that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the steady voice in a crisis, the calm hand on a wrench, or the decision to move toward danger instead of away from it. True service is measured not in medals, but in moments of integrity, in the quiet promise to do the job right when no one is watching. Across every base, flight line, and hangar, there are people like her veterans, mechanics, medics, and pilots, ordinary men and women whose strength is seen only in the results of their work. They are the ones who make sure others return home safe, who carry duty not for glory, but because it's in their nature to serve. Their stories often go untold, yet they define what it means to live with purpose. If this story moved you, take a moment to honor them. Share it, remember it, and subscribe to military and veteran stories. Because voices like Maya's deserve to be heard, and quiet strength deserves to be seen.